Comedian Tim Ferguson is a former member of the Doug Antony All-Stars, and for the past 4 years he's been teaching comedy writing in Melbourne. This year he returned to stand-up comedy after a long absence, armed with a new prop, a big stick. It's not to beat the audience with, his political diatribe does that, but rather to help him walk as he copes with multiple sclerosis. Tim Ferguson, thank you for speaking with 1+1.
Lovely to be here, Jane.
When did you first know you were funny, or are you still waiting?
I'm still waiting for that to occur. I've been told I'm funny, but it's only funny peculiar, which I've turned into some sort of career. But, officially funny, I don't think anybody actually wants to be officially funny, because then you're being laughed at, as opposed to laughed with.
Do you think people are born funny?
No, I don't think people are born funny. I think quite often we learn how to be funny. For me it was, humour was always a very handy skill with which to ingratiate myself in a new school or to dodge the punches of bullies. Because
you moved schools a lot when you were young?
Yeah, I did a lot of schools. Went to 9 schools all in all, which is quite a lot. You learn to say goodbye to people of whom you're really quite fond. And I've spent much of my life actually picking up those strands and friendships and going to school reunions and trying to spark them up again. Usually by saying, hey, let's tell jokes and see if we still connect.
Why I asked you about can you be born funny is I listened to John Cleese recently and expecting to be quite amused by the interview, and he wasn't amusing.
No. You will find that a lot of comedians are actually quite angry. People will say, oh, comedians are depressed, but depression by and large is just unresolved anger. It's a little rat on a wheel that goes round and round and keeps you awake at night. And so most comedians, the great ones, like Cleese, don't just have something to say, they've got bugbears. They've got things they have to get off their chest, things that they will never quite get off their chest. So it's the best comedians are angry, even the cheery ones like Billy Connolly. He's pissed off.
So are you angry?
Yes. Yeah, there are things that anger me deeply.
What kind of things?
Well, mostly at the moment it's politics. And not so much the politics of my political enemies, who are the knuckle-dragging, right-wing guys with bad haircuts who own a lot of stuff. Because I pity those because they had bad potty training and got forced to go to Scotch grammar. And that's going to ruin anybody. The people who really drive me nuts are the people with whom I agree. The Greens are at the pinnacle, the pointy end of my fury. I cannot believe how they are screwing up left-wing politics. The Greens, you've started me now, the Greens tell us that they're not socialists and have a whole bunch of policies that are clearly, obviously, and maybe positively socialist. But they know that socialist is a dirty word, so they say something else. They say we're green, which is like, pick another colour. They're purple, they're this, they're that. They drive me nuts because they're not any good at being left-wing.
If you're angry with your political friends, so to speak, how does that, apart from performing in stand-up, how does that manifest itself when you watch the television at the moment? Do you want to throw something at the screen?
Usually my day begins by flicking on the television and shouting. I have about 10 minutes of shouting at the screen, depending on what's going on. And I find after that, I'm really quite happy to go on happily with the rest of my day. I'll occasionally dash off an article, which will confound, the lefties, who I think are starting to assume I'm some sort of right-wing zealot. But really, I figure the best way to help the people that you agree with is to keep testing their arguments and poking the holes in it.
You said a little earlier you've got to test their arguments. At the moment, we've got quite a few arguments going on in the country. Why do you think the government, for some reason, has not been able to get their policies through? And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with having a hung parliament.
Because, Jane, they don't believe in them. The carbon tax is something that Julia, God love her, and she's in a terrible place, which is, the lodge. It's a very difficult building to live in. She doesn't believe in it. She said she doesn't believe in it. She said she wouldn't introduce it, but of course she has to because of these ridiculous green people who are actually, they're the purples. Green is the colour of, putrefaction. So it's because they don't believe in them. And you have the left faction and the right faction who don't agree with each other on anything. So that's the core of the problem.
You've written a manual about comedy. Is there always an easy formula for comedy?
No, God, there's no easy formula. The book I've written, The Cheeky Monkey, is about the principles of comedy. When I started looking at these, of course, they're right there. And they're principles everybody knows, but it's a bit like Dolly Parton in Steel Magnolias. We know the principles of comedy in our heart, but not in our heads. And so I've just written a book which helps the writers of anything on the screen understand comedy in their head, in their little easily distracted heads.
Because you don't like screenwriting in this country, do you?
I think it's in an appalling state. It has been for usually because the screenwriters themselves don't understand what comedy is. They're unaware that comedy has principles. And so particularly through the Howard era, they just brought out these bleak stories that basically were proving that Australia is, a terrible place where just terrible things happen. And you may not even have heard of the films because they all sank without a trace, because people like to go to the movies, sure, to learn and maybe to experience mimetically things that are dark, but without balance. Without the two masks, the laughing mask and the crying mask, operating together, you not only don't have a story, but you don't have a mood. You won't make people cry if all you're doing is setting out to make them cry. If you have a little sprinkling of humour, all of a sudden you get under their skin.
Why did you choose to go into teaching when you had at least one great career? There's probably two in there. Is that a specific goal in your life that you want to impart knowledge? How did that come about?
Well, I love teaching, Jane, but I'd never even considered it until basically my wheels started to fall off in the last couple of years of the Doug Antony All-Stars.
That was with the multiple sclerosis?
With multiple sclerosis, and I would wake up and half my body wouldn't work. And being, an Anglo-Saxon Irish Catholic raised male, I avoided the doctors as much as I could. But once the All-Stars finished up, I finally thought, well, I'm going to have to go and deal with this. And I managed to, stay a step ahead of MS for a long time. But these days my left leg drags. I look like Quasimodo walking down the street. So I really thought I'm going to have to come up with something that can see me through until I'm 80. And this teaching of comedy to screenwriters just was a perfect fit. I love doing it. And also, there's no point in me having an argument with the older screenwriters. I just want to change all the new ones, which is, that way I don't even have to ask permission of these crusty people who just want to make people weep.
The MS, you said in the early days that it was something that was there but not very frequently. Is it something that in any way dominates your life at the moment?
I like to look at it, Jane, as a passenger. And I don't mind having a passenger, an annoying passenger, but I refuse to let this passenger drive anything or make any choices. The one thing MS can't affect in your brain is willpower. And so I refuse to allow it to stop me from doing the things I want. Now, sure, I can't go on a dancing tour, interpretive dance, which of course is my calling. But I can do pretty well anything else. I've got a live show coming up which is called Carry a Big Stick, because I carry a very large stick. So that's kind of fun. So I'm doing stand-up and writing a novel and doing a movie and teaching a whole new generation of writers how to write properly. And that's fine by me. And the fact that on some days it's harder to get out of bed, or, you know, something will go wrong, or I wake up and I'm cross-eyed, being cross-eyed is okay. I'm a comedian. It's not really that much of a problem. Now, there are people who have a lot harder time with MS, and they've got this kind of MS called secondary progressive, and it can be just like a freight train, and it just comes in and, you know, smashes everything. I've got the other kind, which is repeating, remitting, which repeats and remits. I mean, it comes and it goes. Oh, I'm using jargon. You get what I mean. So I figure everybody's got something, and we all have willpower, so we just go with the willpower and see how far it gets us.
Tim Ferguson, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Oh, Jane, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.